So why is it important to understand the students while teaching?
What? Understand like student psychology or
understand where they're coming from and like how they learn.
Sure. Well, one of the things that I've noticed in teaching is that, and I certainly used to do this when I first started teaching, was that I created the class without thinking about the students. And so I didn't really figure out how they like to learn or where they were coming from or what they were interested in, because you need to use where students are at to help them get to where you want them to go. Mm-hmm. You have to find out where they are to help them get to where you want them to get to. And the more you make an assumption without meeting them, the harder it is to help them get to where they need to go. So for example, you may want to have them write an essay every week, but if many of them have never written an essay ever, you may have to take like the first 3 weeks of a class to really work with them on some of the basic essay writing skills.
Right.
Now, granted, it's not as relevant when you're in a project-based school where you're not having all students do the same thing at the same time, but in general, I think that that's true.
Okay. Do you think that psychology is important in education?
Yeah, I do. I think that the psychology classes that I took when I got my teaching license have really come in handy. I think understanding, for me as a grade 7 through 12 teacher, understanding adolescent psychology, understanding how the brain develops, helps you to work better with students. It helps you to have some perspective, to not take things as personally sometimes, to know that being challenged or being ignored, which may be the same thing, is all developmentally what's part of the deal. And it's not that you have to be okay with being disrespected, but I think you just need to be more understanding, more empathetic of where each student is coming from.
Do you think that learning styles should be assessed in education, and why?
Well, I'm not really, we've done some professional development about different kinds of learning styles. There's lots of different ways that you can do it. I think what's really important is that you need to have kind of an individualized approach to education. I think that every student learns differently. I mean, some kids are visual learners, some are kinesthetic learners, but that's really simplistic. Actually, we learn in lots of different ways, and you need to develop a relationship with an individual student, and then help that student use the strengths to work on things that they need to work on.
Right.
Hey, Mara, can you take everybody away because I'm doing an interview? Yes, get them all to disappear.
Okay. Do you think it's difficult to fulfill all students' needs, and why?
Yes, I think so. I mean, I think meeting a student's need, the only need that a student needs to have, is, the only need that you need to focus on really is how to help them get the best education that they can. But there are so many forces that really work to keep that from happening. And it can be what's going on at home, what's going on in the world, what's going on in somebody's head, what's going on in your school. And so you just have to keep working with a student, being fully aware of all the different challenges to help that student be successful. Really, you should be helping students meet their own needs. You should be helping every student become an independent lifelong learner. That should be the goal. And everything else is gravy.
What do you think the pros are to using psychology and learning styles in education?
Well, I think it can help you to understand when things happen. I think it can help you anticipate what may happen, and it helps you plan and prepare. It helps you to kind of soften some of the blows for you, maybe professionally, like when students can be difficult or challenging. I think it also can help you communicate with parents, like when certain behaviors emerge. I remember once I did a parent-teacher conference in Egypt, and the dad was like, my daughter's behavior is ridiculous. And I was like, well, your daughter's behavior is very atypical. Mm-hmm. I understand why you'd be upset with it, but I've seen it before. And I think when you can say that to somebody, I think sometimes it helps them to relax. Oh, my kid in some ways is like all other kids, even though, ironically or paradoxically, every kid is different.
Exactly. Do you think there are cons to using psychology and learning styles?
Well, I think anything that's jargon-laden or there are these steps, now, first it's attachment and then it's, and I think thinking about psychology in a very narrow, programmatic sort of way keeps you from really listening. And I think you just have to be willing to listen to all the students, what they're telling you, by their words and by their actions.
Mm-hmm. So there's studies say that there's a gap between ethnic groups in education. Why do you think that is?
if by gap you mean academic performance, I think it's about opportunities.
Opportunities.
What that means is, if you're African American and you live in an urban area, like you live in Minneapolis, like you don't have the same access to resources, to opportunities as a white person who was born in Edina. That just straight up is the fact.
Yeah.
You know, and like your family situation is going to be different, your friends, what it's like to be out in the community, what sports you can have access to, what clubs you can join. And I just think that when kids come to school, they're already behind because they haven't had the same sorts of experiences, or they haven't had the healthy, read lots of books, have lots of visual stimuli, it's lots of television, or it's lots of instability is the word that I would use. Like when you go farther down in terms of socioeconomics, less and less stability.
Okay, so okay, as the rate of education is going, what do you think it will look like in the future?
I think it will become more driven by technology. I think it'll become more individualized. More students will do online learning or have online learning be part of what they do. There will still be a role for space and place, but I think students will have more and more opportunities to do things differently. I think they'll find as the cost of college keeps going up, more and more students will be less interested in going to college or in trying to find as many cost-cutting measures as possible, like PSEO, like online classes and stuff like that.
In what you think, do you think that education is getting worse or better?
Oh, I think it just is. I think it's hard to say that something's getting worse or better. I think that's more a product sometimes of my own perspective or imagination or lack thereof. I think that we're becoming more and more aware of the challenges that it takes to help every student be successful. But education is not just an education problem. It's a poverty problem. It's a communities problem. It's a parenting problem. It's a societal problem. And education is kind of like where we are. Like we get a lot of criticism on the back end. Like the teachers are a bunch of lazy bums who aren't thinking about what's best for kids. I haven't met a teacher who isn't thinking about what's best for kids. But I think it's really difficult to help students be successful when you consider all the challenges that everybody faces.
Okay. Do you think any change is needed in education? And why?
Well, obviously I think there needs to be a de-emphasis in testing. I think we need to think more practically about what our next steps are for graduates, like how to help them get jobs that actually will pay for benefits and like help them find a future that's going to work for them. And that doesn't mean saddling them with a ton of college debt.
Yeah.
So, I think those are things that would be great if they happen. I think it'd be great if more schools tried to standardize less and tried to individualize more, and think about education as being more of a journey than here are all these benchmarks. Every kid has to meet them, pass the test, get the diploma, go off and whatever.
What do you think is the biggest misconception of education?
I think that because everybody has been to school, I think everybody in some ways thinks that of being like an expert about school.
Right.
Is it running out of battery?
Oh, you're good. You're good.
Okay. I think people feel like, whatever school experience they had, and this isn't for every person, but I've seen lots of people feeling like whatever school experience they had, well, that would be good enough for my kids. And it's like the world's just changing so quickly. What we're doing today isn't going to make any sense 30 years from now. We have to just keep moving and keep trying to listen to where students are at and try to be aware of where the world is and help them to be successful in that world, not kind of wish for a world that was maybe relevant in 1953.
Right. What tools do you find to be most effective in educational systems?
Well, one tool would be like the ability to develop meaningful interpersonal relationships. Another tool would be connecting young people with experts in the community who are passionate about what they do and love to do it and want to talk about it, want to share that with people. I guess to a lesser degree, you could say the internet. The internet can connect you to anyone, anywhere, anytime. I don't think most people know how to use the power of the internet. It's kind of like it's Wikipedia. It's like that deep. But there's a way to get at some things that are much deeper. So I think those are some tools that are pretty important.
Okay. What are some strategies you use to help students retain information?
To be honest with you, I have to admit that I'm not that interested in the retaining of information. I think that the way that the world is set up, especially in terms of technology, you can get access to information at any time. You forget anything about the Revolutionary War, you can type in the Revolutionary War and get the basics that you need now. You can watch a video that's 13 minutes long and get, obviously it's not depth, but, if you're trying to think about how to retain complex ideas, I'm not sure why you'd want to do that. Sure, study something and engage in it and have a conversation about it and maybe write a paper or a book or give a presentation about it. But I don't think the expectation should be that then you keep all that information in your head. Yeah, I have lots of historical facts in my head, but that doesn't necessarily help me figure out how to listen to people better.
Yeah.
And help them find what they need. One of the things is if you love something too much, you want everybody to love it too. And instead you kind of have to let them love what they love. If you want education to work. Yes, there are all these things that kids are required to learn. And you help them figure a way to get through it. But I think retaining information in the 21st century, I don't know why it would make a ton of sense.
Okay. And then, what do you think is missing in education?
What's missing? I think a general kind of calm patience. I think there's always this desire to we've got to innovate, we've got to change things, we've got to test, we've got to get these results. And kids aren't like automobiles. You can't just test and test and test and test them and then you get the best car you could possibly get. It's kind of like you have to let every child grow, kind of like gardening. You kind of have to let every plant grow, and you make sure the soil's good, and you get some water in there and try to get all the weeds out. But you kind of have to let every plant find its way. You kind of have to let every student find his or her way. And I think that that's hard as our society, because we don't trust parents, or we don't trust teachers, and we certainly don't trust kids. And so we've got to put all these rules in place so that they follow all these really specific things, because we think somehow if they sat in the classroom and got a D in biology, then that means that they understand, mitosis. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Do you think any of them remember any of it? And we haven't even talked about math. How much math are people remembering? But we're going to expect every 8th grader to get through Algebra 1. So it doesn't mean that math or knowledge or any of that isn't important. I love knowledge and I love learning, but I've also learned enough after teaching for such a long time that everybody does everything differently. So I just have to kind of ride that and figure out where students are at and help them get to where I think they should go and where they think they should go, kind of blend those two together.
All right. Well, thank you. And that's it.